Hello, fellow homebrewers. JP here, and I want to introduce to you the brand new Brewbuilt X1 Conical Series available at More Beer. More Beer sells the highest standard in homebrewing equipment, and the Brewbuilt Conicals are just that. They're made from mirror-polished 304 stainless steel, and they come with loads of features that you and I have been looking for. They have a full 2-inch bottom dump valve, which will eliminate your clogging issues, while the sturdy base includes 4 reinforced legs, just like those big pro tanks do. More Beer also carries the Brewbuilt line of options and add-ons like casters, pressure kits, and even external glycol chillers. So you can find out more about the new Brewbuilt X1 Conical Unitanks by going over to morebeer.com for detailed videos on the entire line of Brewbuilt Conicals. You can trust Brewbuilt with your next fermentation, and you can trust More Beer to find the right conical for you. Brewbuilt at morebeer.com.
Everybody, welcome to the session. I'm your host, Justin Crosley, and I am back in the studio today with an old friend and a brewer, maybe the best brewer you've never heard of. Some of you who've listened closely may have heard of my guest today, but most of you are about to listen to a full show with me talking to one of the best brewers in California that you've never heard of. Nick Mamir from Bartlett Hall Brewing Company is with me. Welcome, Nick.
Yo, what's up? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. Folks are going to get to listen the roundabout way that you've made it into this studio. This show and every show we do is brought to you by More Beer. Of course, go to morebeer.com and check them out. Check out their Brewbuilt line of jacketed conicals, or maybe their Comos kegerators. They're all completely awesome. Or just go to their website daily for their deal of the day. Go to morebeer.com and check them out. And when you do order, just thank them in the notes for sponsoring this show, as they always have. All right. So Nick Mamir, oddly enough, and you're going to know better than me. I used to work here at the Hop Grenade, and it seems like ages ago now. How long ago were you a Hop Grenade
I think
team member?
I joined, I think Kevin told me I was like the first. I think he said I was the first hire that wasn't like an original hire. So I was the first guy you guys brought in.
When we needed to hire.
Right. In like 2014. And then I think I pieced out in about 2018, if I remember right.
Yeah, you were here for a while.
Yeah.
And were you a brewer before that at all?
Just a crazy home brewer. That's kind of what brought me here to begin with.
Okay. All right. We're going to dive into your brewing history, of course, because I want to know, how you got here. But let's talk about the beer in our glass. I like diving right into that.
Yeah.
I've got your Pal Around Pils in my glass. Tell us about the beer.
Yeah. This is kind of my German Pils here. Fairly simple. It was actually my first time spunding a beer, which was cool.
Which is when you capture the CO2?
Right. Yeah. It's basically like a more controlled PRV, essentially. So like about halfway through fermentation, you put this thing on there and you just capture more of that natural carbonation.
Okay. Were you doing that to save money on CO2 or to try this traditional technique?
More the latter. I mean, the first part of that is obviously great too. But yeah, German Pils. I do another more Italian style Pilsner.
Okay.
As well. And grain bills on those are pretty similar. For this one, I've been recently like scooting up the bitterness here and there. Sort of just differentiate them more.
I see.
Yeah, hops are...
Is this supposed to be more of a Czech Pils then?
It's, it's getting there almost like in the bitterness, right? Like it almost comes across that way. I'm calling it a German Pils, but this batch to me almost tastes more Czech because of like the quality of the bitterness. It's got a good amount of Sterling, which I think is like a Saaz. You know, like I think it's related to Saaz.
Yeah.
It's like a higher alpha American grown version of that. It's got Sapphire, which is kind of like one of the cool kid Pils hops now, and it's Tetning.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a nice beer.
Nice,
I like
dude.
the firm bitterness in this one.
Yeah. I kind of like that in a Pilsner too.
It's still got kind of the malt of a Bohemian Pils. It's pretty flowery.
Yeah, I feel what you're saying on that. So this one, another change versus the last batch is I put in a little more carafoam.
Okay.
Which sometimes I use, sometimes I don't. This one, I brought that up a little more than I normally would, and I think that's where you taste like a little of that malt character. It's still dry, but
Yeah.
there is
Oh, yeah.
a little bit of like a breadiness to it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, that's a great beer.
thanks, dude.
All right, so you got into home brewing when? Like college or what?
Yeah, like pretty much right when I turned 21, I want to say.
Okay.
I mean, I started. I'll just throw it. I mean, I started drinking way before I was really supposed to.
Most of us did,
Most of
yeah.
us do.
Yeah.
And I think sometime around the time I was like 20 or 19, I was like, man, it would be so cool to like
Right.
to make this, right? Like I was already drinking a lot of like old school craft beers,
Okay.
Anderson Valley, things like that.
Yeah.
Mendocino. And I just remember thinking, man, it'd be really cool to do this. And I brought it up, actually, another of your former coworkers, Mike, him and a bunch of our other buddies. I was like, hey, we should try to figure out how to do this. And I remember Mike, he was like, dude, you can't do that. Like, you need like a airlock in your house or like, there's no way to do it.
You'll die.
And then maybe like 3 weeks later, he was like, yeah, me and Malcolm, we're gonna homebrew. And I was like, oh, you fucker.
We talked about
yeah.
this.
So they sort of got started on it. And then I pretty quickly once they sort of figured that out, hopped on. Did that for a few months and then quickly realized I wanted all my own things so I could just...
Oh, yeah.
Because, you know, I was mostly watching them brew at that point, and I was like, all right, I need to figure out and retain all of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So you got into it. Like you just were into the process right away.
yeah, totally. Yeah. And well, I think initially I was really into like the recipe writing, but I wanted to understand the processes better, and I knew the best way for me to do that is to make a bunch of small adjustments, and I didn't want to have to have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
So in about that time, one of the guys, Malcolm, he was working at More Beer. He got a job working there.
Oh, perfect.
And he set me up with like everything I needed to build out their system. And
Yeah.
so I started from that, and I sort of made some adjustments. But yeah, and I was brewing like a nut for a long time there.
It sounds like you were brewing all grain from like the beginning.
So over there we started extract, but yeah, when
okay.
I got all my own stuff,
Yeah.
I had like a pretty cool. I mean, it's in pieces, and I haven't even thought about it in a long time. But I had a cool like all the float switches and
Okay. Yeah.
like the heat exchanger, what is it, Herm system for the mash, which was rad. I wish
yeah.
I had that at the brewery. That kind of, I would always just strike in a little low and then let it bring itself up to temp, and it would just stop like magic.
It'd just be perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. And to do that, you must have been brewing a lot. Like you kind of have, if you had it that dialed in. My thing I've always said is like, people have always asked me like, you must know so much about brewing beer. And I'm like, I probably know a ton about it, but because I never practice it, I couldn't brew you a good beer to save my life. So you must have, if you had it that dialed in, you were homebrewing all the time.
I think by the time I was here, especially, I was like brewing like once a week and would have like 12. I was always just buying new kegs to fill up, and then like I just like pull them out, and they'd just get warm because I loved having beer on tap. But yeah, I was pretty obsessed with it, like so many are, and I was just looking like I would have like parties at my house just to try to clear kegs out so I could brew into them the next day or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Just to go through beer. So the time you started here, you just kind of wanted another like job in beer, basically, while you were still figuring out homebrewing?
So I had just finished college, which I originally went in to be. I went to SF State. I thought I wanted to be an electrical engineer. Very quickly, I was like, dude, this is so like this is way too much math. You know.
Okay. Yeah.
I was like, I had another job. I was like working at a pizza place the whole time I was in school, and I was like, there's no way I can. I can't do this. And I ended up a bunch of just like the random courses I was taking just because they were interesting. I got a degree in English, flirted with the idea of maybe being, doing a grad program and maybe getting into teaching. And then I was like, I don't think I want to do that either. And I was sort of just trying to figure things out. And I can't remember why I came here. Like why I was on this side of the bridge. But I was here with my now wife, and we were sitting at the bar, and somebody came in right next to us with an application, was like, hey, are you guys hiring? And then Kevin came out. I didn't know Kevin at the time. And he's like, yeah, we're interviewing now. And I had been applying for all kinds of beer jobs, like distributors and trying to get a brewing job and all that, and no experience.
Yeah.
And then she was like, hey,
why don't you?
Yeah, you should just apply here. And I was like, I had just finished school, and I was like, I wanted to get like a 40-hour, or that's what I thought I wanted.
Yeah.
And came home and slopped together a resume like that day and sent it in before the day was over. And,
nice.
And then Kevin hit me up like the next afternoon.
Yeah, back then it was really important to us that you were either a home brewer or some sort of beer even if you were entry level like server, bartender. We really cared about your beer background. Things have changed a little bit. There's not as many of you around anymore for us to be so strict. So I'm sure he called you right away because he's like, okay, all right, this guy kind of fits the bill. And you did. All right, we're going to talk more about your brewing history, but let's talk a little bit about Bartlett Hall first, just to make sure everybody knows like where you're from. So I feel like I knew about Bartlett Hall even well before you were there. I stumbled into it one day and just thought it's like the coolest place. It has a tiny brewery in the corner, which we'll talk about. But I wasn't even there for that. I was just passing through. I think I was taking some other SF tourists around the touristy part of SF. We go in. The food's awesome. The bar's cool. There's like a hotel / hostel upstairs, right? All of these things. So I always thought it was just like the coolest place. So let's just talk a little bit about Bartlett. So it is all those things I described, right? Full restaurant, hotel upstairs.
Yeah.
But there is this tiny weird brewery in the corner.
Uh-huh.
And that's always been there? Or?
Yeah. So I think originally, the guys that own Bartlett Hall, they own that hotel next to it and above it as well. And my understanding is that building became vacant, and they were like, hey, it makes sense to take this over. We have a hotel right here. Right. Let's put in a restaurant. We might as well. The guys that own the place, they're all sort of restaurateurs.
Okay.
The hospitality guys. And it became vacant, and they wanted, a lot of people, they got that Type 75 brew pub license where it's like, I think my understanding is that, I don't know if this is still the case, but at the time, the state would just issue like an unlimited amount of them. Rather than have to sit through permitting hell in San Francisco, they're like, hey, if we open a brewery here, we can get a liquor license right away, right? So,
and that's really the crux of it, right? So to get a liquor license in San Francisco, now it's not even, now you're basically buying it from somebody else.
Right.
Back in the day, you probably waited and still paid a bunch of money for it. So this Type 75 thing, and I don't know the history of it, I should have looked it up more, came up a long-ass time ago. Mm-hmm. And yeah, if you were going to brew beer, then you could sell all the other liquor.
Right.
Only under this particular license. And there used to be very few restrictions about it.
Right.
In other words, I think that at the time the people who owned Bartlett did this, they probably could have bought like a half-barrel more beer brewing kit, stuck it in the corner, and no one ever would have cared or checked on them.
I think by the time they opened, it needed to be a 7-barrel minimum. You have to be able to yield 7 barrels, which I think is how it still is. And that's how they started. That's how they started off. And they're like, yeah, we'll try it out. It'll be cool. We'll make beer.
Right.
But I think they were more, they wanted to have the bar and all that. And they hired a brewer. I think I don't know as much about him. I never met the guy, but I think he like relocated to Colorado, and then they ended up hiring Wynn, who now owns Wondrous.
That's right, Wynn.
Because they're like, hey, if we're gonna have a brewer, let's get a kick-ass brewer. And there's this young guy that works at Lagunitas. We know about Lagunitas. Let's give him a shot. And then he kind of knocked it out of the park, and all of a sudden it was like, oh shit, the beer is actually like good and a draw, and it's we're selling as much of it as we can make all the time. So it's sort of like I think initially they didn't set it up necessarily with the idea of it being like the best brewery in the world, but Wynn just exceeded their expectations so much that it sort of reframed how they thought about it a little bit,
instead of just being kind of an afterthought.
Right.
See, to me, that's good ownership. When you just, even if it wasn't the path you set out on, if you just kind of recognize that and go with it and help it, that's good stuff. Like a lot of times that'll happen in places and ownership doesn't give a shit. They don't notice. So
yeah, I mean, they're definitely like I don't know. They have like a pretty strong entrepreneurial. They want to try every little thing. So it's like, oh, like, hey, this is doing pretty cool, like pretty good. Like, oh, that's cool. Like,
right.
Let's try to grow this thing.
Sure. And then historically, though, so the building itself has been around for like 100+ years, right?
Yeah. I just talked to one of the owners, Chris. He told me that the building was built in like 1915.
Okay.
So you're talking like almost 115-year-old.
Yeah.
Old San Francisco building for sure.
Yeah.
I've seen, it was like a French restaurant for a really long time called like the Paris Hotel. I've like Googled it just randomly trying to dig up history, and I've seen like old postcards and stuff of the place. And then I think the most interesting thing is it was, so like JFK during the Camelot years and stuff, his White House chef was this guy, Rene Verdon.
Okay.
And then, I'm trying to remember was it the Johnsons that took over after JFK? I don't know.
I don't remember either.
I think it was the Johnsons. But anyway, like they wanted him to, so he's this crazy, French chef, and their administration, they were kind of like bringing in more global influence, to like American culture in general. And then like I think it was the Johnsons wanted him to use, frozen vegetables, and he was just like, no way, and quit on the spot.
Oh wow.
And he opened in the spot we're in, the spot called Le Trianon.
Yeah.
And it apparently was like a huge deal. He's like one of the most influential old school like Californian cuisine guys.
Okay.
So yeah, it's been around a long time. It's got, for I think directly before us, it was a Greek restaurant, and there's all these weird like you can see like there's like pillars in there, and you can see like the tops of these Greek style pillars. There's all if you look around, it's like, oh, weird. And
yeah,
you walk around in the basement and like it's like, oh, this used to be like a pool like 70 years ago or something like that. So yeah, it's a wacky spot.
It is, and that's part of what I like about it.
Totally.
Yeah. Honestly, I think that based on the beer, and we're going to talk more about the awards you've won, based on the food I've had there, and based on the history, I don't know why it's not incredibly more famous as Bartlett Hall than it is right now. Because it just has such a cool thing to it. Everything about it, I've always liked.
Yeah, it's wacky, like, and I've come to appreciate it more and more. Like originally, I was like, oh, I want, it doesn't look like your standard brewery, and I think that used to bug me a little bit, and now it's like, actually, this is kind of cool. Like, you go into a lot of tap rooms nowadays, and they all look sort of the same, I suppose. Like, they're all kind of industrial, they're all kind of, and it's like, I sort of reframed how I looked at it. It's like, okay, so there's things about brewing on that system that are kind of wacky and shitty and take extra steps. But it's also like, along with that, there's kind of a unique aspect to it that I've come to really love. Just like some of the stuff, when it's a pain, you just have to learn to like laugh at it and enjoy it. It's the best way to approach it anyway.
I think how you're describing it is what I've always liked about it too. And I'm telling you, it's before Wynn was there, before you were there. I just went in. And I loved that it was different. Mm-hmm. And I want to say, especially since we're talking about its history of chefs, the food was always different too. Like the food there is really good. They're a food focused place that now has this awesome beer focus now for a while. But
yeah,
I feel like they were obviously chefs before, first.
Right. Yeah. Our current chef, Carlo, he's the man, and he and I have been working more together. We're doing this thing we're calling like Brewer's Table, but like we're like trying to put together like a thoughtful pairing or so a month. And sort of just embrace that, like, like I said, I think brewpub was, or I didn't say it, now I'm saying it. I think brewpub was like a bad word for a while there in beer amongst a lot of people. And now you're seeing so many people go back to that model. And I don't know, like, it's pretty awesome having a food program and getting to play around. Like, I love food too. And, just getting to play around with like beer and food a lot. I think I used to think of that as hokey for some reason, and now it's like, no, that's badass. Like,
absolutely.
Like that's the best. And being able to take my food to people that are stoked, or I'm sorry, my beer to people that are stoked on food, and then watch them put a twist on it and pick up on things that are in the beer that I maybe. It's like, oh, that's what you're training in on. And it's, to me, that's super rad.
It is. And it's what an experience. And I think you're right, kind of keying in on like the brew pub is almost being a bad word because I guess it's still used today. But people that were more food focused along with the beer switched up to gastropub at some point. Right. And you had to be. So now, don't call me a brew pub. I'm a gastropub because we care about the food. I kind of like that you're claiming, no, we care about the food, and I love being a brew pub. Like, remember, like Magnolia's thing up in the Haight, right? To me, that Magnolia was kind of my first gastropub experience, and it was from interviewing the owner, Dave McLean, at the time, and I understood it. He was a foodie and just loved like English ale, and so he had a gastropub. But I kind of like just take back brewpub. It works just the same if you're feeling the same about it. If your chef's experience is the same about it. Right.
And then also like Russian River is one of the best breweries on the entire planet, if not the best. And my favorite place to go is still the brewpub.
The brewpub, yeah.
And that's not, the hangout space in there too. It's eclectic and it's got this kind of wacky, dark, like a little bit dingy vibe to it that I love. And like, that's where I want to hang out. So I kind of like that. I kind of like looking at the walls and there being like interesting stuff on it and it not just being like a fully sterile.
Yeah.
I think that like came from people just being like, I want you to experience the beer and only the beer and that's it. But like, I don't know. There's something to a building and a drinking space having a little bit of character.
I agree with you.
I don't know.
We here at the Hop Grenade started, and so you would have seen it, fairly sterile, right? Like warm in terms of furniture and decor, right? But pretty clean walls, no kitsch, no tap handles, no, like all of that, right? And I still like that. I wouldn't call us like sterile. But I do think that over the decade, we've grown away from that because we've created our own experiences here.
And maybe that just happens with time, right?
It's with time. I guess that's what I'm saying. Like, we didn't want to adopt anybody else's time. So we didn't put up other people's beer plaques and old beer posters and stuff like that. But over time, I now have 13 of our own beer festivals and countless more in-house events. And who knows what, right? And then just little pieces that our staff has put together over the years. And anyhow, I'm kind of saying that even though we're not as like full up as a 50-year-old bar, I like when you start to grow your own character.
I give it 40 years, you'll be there, man.
Yeah, that's right. Well, someone will be there.
All right.
Let's put it that way. All right. Why don't we talk about the painted devil that's in our glass? And I want to do this. We're going to get, of course, back to more about your brewing history as we go. But this is a Belgian Golden Strong, right?
Yeah.
An exemplary of the amount of medals that you've won over the years. Tell us about the beer, and we'll kind of dive into that.
Yeah, Belgian Golden Strong was never like a go-to style for me back in the day, but I like brewing a ton of Belgian beer at Bartlett Hall. I think it's really like clean, non-mixed firm, non-acidic Belgian beer was sort of really the thing when I got into beer. Like that was the big deal then. That was the hot thing. And I think it's like I'd like to see more of it out in the world. I think it's very food friendly. Like it's like one of those things that makes sense to do if you're a brew pub. And I was just going through. I had brewed with all kinds of other Belgian yeasts, and I was like, you know what, I want to try this Belgian Golden Strong yeast. So I put together this beer. This yeast is apparently I'm using it completely wrong.
Oh, really?
Like I've talked to other brewers. I'm like, man, it's such a pain in the ass. It always stalls, and they're like, and then I explain what I do to it, and they're like, yeah, that's why it stalls, dude. But I like to knock this out at like 57, 58 degrees.
Which is way cold for it, right?
Way cold. Yeah.
Okay.
Like
by like 10 degrees?
Yeah, definitely. Because it's like, well, I don't really want all the estery character. I want it to be clean, because my understanding of the style is it's like, you know, Duvel is sort of like the OG.
Yeah.
And the reason it's called Duvel or like Devil is because it's like sneaky, right? Like it's not supposed to taste like it's 8.5%. So I like to knock this one out really low, step it up a little bit, but like the first 48 hours, keep it like in the low, high 50s, low 60s.
Okay.
It usually gets about halfway through fermentation and stalls, and then I'll just shut off the glycol entirely. And then if it needs even more help, like there's been points where I'm like, I don't know if it's going to finish out. Like I'll blast the manway door with just like hot water, like 200 degree water until it picks up again, and it'll just rip bone dry.
Wow.
At that point. I did that. I want to say the reason that started happening is because I had like a solenoid for my temp control broke on me, and it stayed my glycol stayed open. So I came in the next day and I was like, this is at like, it was crashed. It was at like 32 degrees.
Oh,
and so I got it back up as quick as I could. And then that year, so it went through all that, and it won a bronze at
the World Beer Cup.
World Beer Cup.
Yeah.
And then so I've done it the same way. Not quite. I knock it out low and step it up, and then it actually repeated this year too. So it's gotten
another
two
bronze
in a row. Yeah.
At the World Beer Cup.
Yeah.
And just for those of you who are casual drinkers listening to the show, the World Beer Cup is just what it sounds like. All countries enter it, and it's really fun to watch different countries win different categories, because in theory, this category should have been won by the Belgians. Like they should almost sweep it, right? And so it's always cool when an American brewer, and probably for you too, gets to place in a category that is completely un-American, right?
Yeah. And, and I have a lot of respect for, like, I still feel like all my favorite, or not all of them, but most of my favorite Belgian beers like are the original, like the OGs, like the benchmarks. So yeah, it's really, it's kind of a trip. I couldn't believe it, but yeah, in terms of the style and what I'm doing with the beer, it's really simple. It's it's like almost entirely Weyermann extra pale premium pills, just like the leanest, cleanest pills I could find.
Okay.
Like a bag of wheat and some acidulated malt and just a ton of dextrose. Like the idea is you just want something, you want it to almost drink like a Pilsner, like your Pilsner drinkability and this high ABV, super bone dry kind of beer.
And what's this, about 8.5 or something?
This is 8.5.
Yeah. I think you nailed it just like that. And you nailed it kind of like a Duvel style. So low esters, which I love. They're there just a little bit, kind of on the, but I'm confusing them almost with like a little bit of alcohol sweetness.
Totally.
So like the first flavor, I'm like, okay, there's a little bit of that bubblegum ester, but then that kind of just turns into, no, I think that might just be alcohol sweetness that I'm tasting, which I like better because I wouldn't like it to just be bubblegummy, and it's not. And then it's just bone dry afterward. But whatever that sweetness is, alcohol or otherwise, it's the perfect complement to that bone dry. So it doesn't, and by alcohol sweetness, I mean like it evaporates, right? So
Right.
it doesn't cloy at all. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you kind of nailed it on that.
Yeah, it's got like a sweetness, like a implied. I think it's 100% alcohol sweetness.
Okay.
And there is some ester, character to it for sure. But I think there's a sweet aspect to it that isn't residual sugar sweet. I think this thing finishes at like half a Play-Doh.
Oh, wow.
Real dry.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I mean,
That's great.
And it does lend like a idea of body kind of a little bit, but yeah, you want it dry and clean and easy
Are you
to drink.
entering this again at World Beer Cup this year?
Yeah, or at JBF, I guess.
At
yeah.
JBF, okay. And when you win with it like that, especially 2 years in a row, are you just trying to duplicate your process perfectly, or do you tweak it and you're like, well, I got a bronze, maybe I'll get a silver?
Yeah, right. That's it. So I do that with some beers. This one I've pretty much left the same. Although, like, one thing I want to mess with because of that alcohol, like the head retention on this kind of sucks.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't help. This is a growler, right? So I think
Yeah,
you lose.
yeah.
But I've recently heard that they're using that like Tetra. There's a hot product you can use for bitterness that really greatly improves your head retention.
Okay.
And I've heard whispers that that's what Duvel is doing to keep that, so it's like, okay,
Interesting.
next time, or, test batch before the next comp I want, because that is one thing that I would love to change about this beer is it will initially pour this like beautiful foam and then you just watch it disappear. And
I haven't had a Duvel in so long. I can definitely picture that awesome thick head of foam. I just kind of can't forget if it dissipates, but I'm thinking it doesn't,
it
right?
hangs out, man.
It is for a
it's
while.
got
Laces and everything.
It's got that glass that's for Duvel because it had that beautiful foam. So that's like the kind of things where it's like, how do I, and I was trying to mess with it with process a little bit. I have changed, like, I used to step mash this, then I started doing like more of a single infusion because I thought maybe the way I was step mashing was like potentially negatively impacting foam.
I see.
So I've made changes. I think sometimes like with the beers that I think are hitting the mark mostly in terms of flavor, I start thinking less about recipe and more about like, okay, how can I brew it process wise?
Yeah.
What could I do to make this better?
I feel like that's a great approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's clearly worked for you. You've got a bunch of medals, which we will keep talking about. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're actually going to find out about how Nick's favorite styles are not just these Belgian-style beers, but a lot of dark ales in general. So we're going to talk about that, a little bit more about the history at Bartlett Hall, and so much more right here on The Session. Hang in there. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Session. Thanks for hanging out with us. We are still with Bartlett Hall. Nick Mimir is here, and we're drinking some tasty beer, talking about a little bit of brewing history. We're going to start talking about some award-winning beer in our glass, more award-winning beer. But first, we kind of left off that the owners got our mutual friend Win Weisenhunt. This at least left off with the history here. Brewing at Bartlett Hall. And then, did you start brewing with Win there? Was that your first step into pro brewing?
Yeah, exactly. So I was working here and kind of met Win through here a little bit, but didn't know him well.
Okay.
And he had posted just like, so I had been looking for brewing jobs like crazy and applying to everything.
I see.
Applying
with no experience other than home brewing, I assume?
Right.
No like classes or education either?
No, I mean, I still,
Just curious.
Yeah, like I learned everything I know through this podcast and other podcasts and books and articles, just reading everything I could.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just Win posted like a thing on Facebook being like, hey, I need like help washing some kegs and cleaning lines? And I hit him up and I was like, hey dude, like, I'm down. Like I'll come do anything. I've been trying to, get a foot in the door. And that was probably in like 2016, 15, 16. So I was splitting my time between here and there for a while there.
Yeah.
And was just washing kegs and learned a few things, learned how to clean CIP a tank and stuff like that. But a lot of it was just like being able to hang out in a brewery environment, getting to talk to Win, learning a ton. Like that guy, he's a Domans grad and, has a really good educational background in beer and had worked for Lagunitas, like, you know, in a massive production brewery. So yeah, getting to hang out with him and just be involved in beer and then coming in here all the time too. You know, I always say this place was like a crazy. If you wanted to learn a thing or two about brewing, like I would usually bartend like the Monday night, and it'd be like, oh, Charlie Bamforth is here right now, or even just like Tasty and a bunch of other brewers would be hanging out at the standing bar, and I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna take a 30-minute break. Nice. And I'd just race home and I'd fill up a growler and I'd come and be like, tell me everything that's wrong with this IPA. Tear this apart. Like, and so I always tried to take advantage of that too.
Nice.
But yeah. Wynn brought me on, and he left once to go do Farm Creek, if you remember that.
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So he left, and he was like, hey, do you want to try to take over this? And I was like, there's no way. Like, I'm not ready. Yeah. And he's like, all right. And then he ended up coming back.
Okay.
And he brought me back with him again. And then he when he left to go work at Sante, he was like, hey, I'm leaving. Do you want to take over? And I was like, oh, there's no way. I'm not ready. And he's like, no, you're going to do it. Like he pretty much was like, dude, stop. You're like, let's give it a shot. This. Like it's, and so I kind of got thrown into the furnace a little bit. I wasn't like I hung, same thing like back to my homebrew days. I was hanging out while he was brewing. Okay. I was watching him do a lot of stuff, but I wasn't doing it myself as much. Like you've been in the brew house. It's not even like, it's not that kind of brewery. It's
you
very
both couldn't
tiny.
Even fit there all the time. Yeah.
Right. So there was kind of a crash course where he's like, all right, these are the things you need to do to make sure you don't die.
Yeah. Right.
And, you know, if you have questions, hit me up. And I sort of just hit the ground running, and
he probably left you with all his recipes.
I had all his notes, which is super helpful, right? Yeah. For figuring out hoppy beer. I mean, even like, that was like, even back when I was washing kegs, there were a lot of things where I picked up on where it's like, whoa, like you guys are using like that. You're dry hopping at that rate? Like people do that? Like I didn't even know. Like you know, and I think my even just my home brewing took like a big leap there, where it's like, yeah, the amount you're doing now, do like 5 times that much. It's like I didn't know I could. So
so what? Like, give me an example. Like, are we talking going from 1 pound per barrel to 4 pounds per barrel?
It'd be like, yeah, he'd be like, dude, just toss like a pound of hops into your fermenter for your dry hop, your 5-gallon tank. I'm like, all right, you know, like, because before then, a lot of articles back then were saying like, yeah, do like 2 ounces or maybe 4 ounces or something like that. So yeah, I mean that was definitely super helpful. Like having the perspective of somebody that a commercial brewer, and also somebody who I think is like a wizard with hops.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he kind of always was, like even back then.
So you took over in what are we talking now? 2018?
Like basically, yeah, like December 2017, January 2018, I took over. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. But then I'm kind of looking at your medal list, and you started winning in like the big competitions in 2019.
Yeah.
So in other words, I'm going to pat you on the back here myself, since you won't do it. You went from, I don't even think I'm ready to do this, to a year later winning some medals.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, I have a tendency to be like incredibly hard on myself in terms of like, I was just like, dude, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. And I, I would have like nightmares, like that I served the beer with diacetyl, or that like a customer from here would tell me that my IPA was just a little too bitter, and I'd like wake up, and I'm not shitting you. So it was a lot of tasting other people's beers, and I had already been doing that here, right? Like I had already been tasting so much awesome beer that you guys were bringing in. Mm-hmm. So it's like that. That's what I need to be as good as all this stuff, or even better if I can. Like that should be my goal, not to like. Don't give yourself any passes for being new. Like if people are going to pay the same amount of money for this, like that is what you need to do.
Yeah. So, I was like, as a musician, I was like that. In this, and by the way, I'm not a very good musician, but I was good enough. But my favorite bands, were like the Beatles and Radiohead. And when my stuff didn't sound like that, I was like, you should probably stop playing music, because the bar was high. So I'm related to you in the same way that you're like, man, if I'm not making Russian River, if I'm not making my favorite, then what am I doing here, right? And you just kept striving to get to there, and I feel like you just, that worked for you.
Yeah, and I mean, I still think, I'm not Vinny, but but it's like, yeah, these are the beers I should be aspiring to trying to match. I guess it's like, hold yourself to that high standard, and you're only, in my opinion, like, you're only doing yourself favors by comparing yourself to like the people that are best at the thing you want to do.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, if it's not hindering you, then it can only help you, right? If you're like, okay, I need to step it up, instead of like, oh man, I suck.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So, yeah, the tricky thing with beer too is if you put something out that you're not 100% happy with, it's like going to haunt you as long as it's on. So it's, you either dump that or, that's the best approach to have. Like, it's like, and I've definitely put things out. I'm not saying that we're like dumpable, but it's like, no, I didn't 100% nail this time, like, and by meaning like, this is not as good as it's not as good as Russian River. And it's like, shit, like,
what do I got to do?
Yeah. Right. Over and over and over again. And that was kind of what sort of drove me, I guess.
All right. Well, I think one of your first big competition medals was 2019, silver, by the way, in the Great American Beer Festival for the beer that's in our glass, which is the Powell Street Porter. Yeah,
this porter was the first beer I ever homebrewed, and it's one of my very favorite styles in the world.
Okay.
And it's funny, Russian River comes up because I remember the first time I went there when I was 21, I had my very first sour beer ever was like Consecration. And I tried all these beers, but I remember like I had already loved, dark beers, but I remember trying Russian River Porter and being oh my God. And I still think that beer is like, I don't know why it's not more hyped up. That's that's like a perfect beer.
Yeah.
And I remember, so that was like an early experience. And then this was one of, if not the first, like beer I introduced. That was my recipe at Bartlett.
Okay.
Just because I wanted to make a kick-ass plain old porter.
Yeah.
And I remember I went when shortly after Windsor opened. They were calling it like Windsor Porter at that point. I don't know if they call it Russian River Porter again, but it's the same.
I forget.
Beer.
Yeah.
And I just remember it's like it had this like up front. It was nice and round and like malty, but then it like had this long lingering bitterness to it. Like sometimes I feel like beers kind of have like a shape. Like I guess it's like how I visualize it in my head. And it's like, it's got this like, there's all this depth and it's changing. It's not like one note. It's evolving.
It's not linear at all.
Right. Yeah. So I remember that beer, and then Drake's Black Robusto were kind of my two frames of reference because it had that same thing. So I brewed this one a few times, and I was like, all right, it needs to be a little more lingeringly bitter is like the thing that I was missing. So I added like a little more black patent. And then this one, I remember like I sent that in, I was tasting it, before judging. I always do a thing where I have extra bottles and I like to taste them when I know they're being judged. So then when I get the feedback, I can kind of see what they're talking about. And I remember with this one, I was sort of like, this one, I'm really happy with it, and I don't think I want to change it. Like, this is like what I was trying to do.
Okay. Yeah.
And like, me, I'm always like, man, like I'm still all the time like I missed it. But this one, I was like, I feel like I hit the mark this time, and I'm gonna pat myself on the back. Like, I am happy with this.
Yeah.
And if they tell me that this, if this goes out in the first round, then they're wrong. Like, straight. That's how I felt about this one. And this was the first time I medaled in one of those, big BA competitions.
Yeah.
Then
I was there because I've been streaming the awards for I can't remember how long now, almost 20 years. And I remember seeing you win it, and it was the cool. Tasty was with us back then, and I just remember everyone just so excited about it. But it's a well-deserved medal. And very cool for you to get it, so quickly. But I do like to hear that it's your recipe and your homebrew recipe that you stepped up. Because I wasn't sure about that. I was like, oh, maybe it got passed on and you just like sort of tweaked it and nailed it. But no, this was like your baby all the way through.
Yeah, I even like back in the day, I really wanted to make it like as long, even when it was around, I was like, I want to make like a robust porter, but we had like another big porter with coffee that was kind of like fulfilling that need.
Okay.
And then as soon as I like was given the keys to the Death Star, I was like, all right, we're making that porter.
Right.
Yeah.
And now you guys are located on Powell Street in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool that you get a namesake porter too, Powell Street Porter.
And it's so I kind of intentionally, there's a part of me because I like giving my beers all these wacky names that like allude to like literature and stuff like that. But for this one, I was like, no, like I'm going to do that old school brew pub thing where it's like they just name it after the street they're on. I was like, I don't really want this to be like necessarily like a special beer. I want people to like order it and then drink another pint of it. Like I think porter, if you do it right, is like a drinking beer,
Yes.
It's not like a I don't know. It shouldn't be super filling. It should have like a drying aspect and enough hops that you're wanting to drink multiple of them, I think.
No, I think you're right. I don't think that it is a hearty style as the way people think that it is. I think it's full flavored, full bodied, obviously, but that is different than like the kind of meal that people think of when they think of dark beer, right? And I think that people who truly know a style know that a porter can be just as refreshing as almost anything. But it does have a full flavor, right? So you're not going to have, like, I mean, I guess you can have it with just pretzels, but like it's so full flavored that it's going to like dominate all the things, I feel like. But I'm going to want two of them.
Yeah, and I think like a sort of a hot take is I think a lot of brewers nowadays, when I talk to them, like are scared of hops in anything that isn't like a Pils or like a IPA or like one of those obviously hoppy styles. Like I think like American stout and American porter, it's like, like you should have, it doesn't necessarily always come across in terms of like obvious hop aroma, but it just adds like a balance. Yeah. And this is like a fairly bitter beer. I remember drinking like when I was in school, I would go down to the little pub that was in it was like inside of
in the
SF
student
State.
Center.
Yeah,
I was there.
Yeah.
They built that thing while I was there.
Nice.
Yeah.
I forgot you went there.
Just a little before you.
They would always have like Sierra Nevada Stout, and it's like the thing that makes this beer special is it's got like this kind of floral hop component, and that's always sort of stuck with me. Like
I agree.
Like, I think it's okay to put hops in things.
I was just going to reference Sierra Nevada. Sierra Nevada Porter, to me, is still an all-time classic porter.
Absolutely.
And I think it's because of hops, right? Mm-hmm. Like Ken took a traditional porter, and at the time you could call it Sierra Nevada'd it, which was to make everything hoppier than the beer you were used to. And now, to me, that's the style I want. If I have a more traditional porter, like a real English porter, it's almost a little flat for me. Now, if it's brand new and bright and like dry hopped in the cask like they do, then that's perfection, right? But American brewers don't dry hop in the cask and then serve it that way, right? So you have to put it in the kettle like you've done. Mm-hmm. No, I think this is great. This is a good beer, and clearly the judges think so too.
Yeah, thanks, man.
So yeah. Well, and we're going to taste another one of these kind of on the darker side for you, but I guess what you're saying some of it, but what got you into the Belgian and then these darker English ale styles? Was it just sounds like just having great ones from the breweries around us, or was there some other influence?
I think just like I said with the Belgian stuff, that was when I was coming into beer. That was really sort of like popular. I know a lot of people were doing everybody was doing like Belgian IPA and stuff like that. Like you get these like American hopped Belgian beers, and Belgian beer was kind of like very cool when I was first getting into it. And I don't know, I fell in love with like the drinkability that pale Belgian beer has paired with the complexity, like both at the same time.
Yeah.
And then dark beer, I've always loved. Like when I first got when you first discover kind of like craft beer or whatever, it's like, whoa, that is the most different, just visually. That's that's the craziest thing I've ever seen. You have like a big imperial stout or whatever, and I like big dark beers a lot, but I'm also into those more like drinkable dark beer styles, and I've always been into them. I think early on, I didn't really like IPA, honestly, until I started working here, because I was
All right.
Like most of the IPA I got exposed to was like grocery store, like probably warm stored, you know, pretty old, pretty malty, and then like. I think like having Maui Wowie here, like Ultimate Maui Wowie, like right when that was like a very new thing, was like, whoa, like hoppy beer is awesome. Like this,
Right.
I didn't know it could taste this way. So just, I think it's just, those were the things I was really drinking, you know, when I first got into beer, and I still love them. They're, you know, I like
sense.
all styles, but yeah, I've always had an affinity for both of those.
It's funny. Our history is a bit the same, and literally because of you starting here. But right around when I opened here and you were here, I was not a hophead anymore either. I was when I first started drinking homebrew and craft beer, and then I really wasn't. And then I think you're right. Right around the time of like Maui Wowie and some others, like it just started to change in the direction that I like again. And you do brew IPAs, right? You brought us one called like, what's it? Requiem for a Whiplash.
Like I said, those crazy beer names, yeah.
Yeah. And I've had your IPAs as well. So sometimes to me, and this is probably a silly impression that's outdated. I guess early in my career is what I should say. You either could brew good hoppy beers or you could brew good malty beers. And it was pretty rare that you did both, because your hoppy beers tasted too malty, or your malty beers tasted too hot, like, or vice versa, right? So I'll be honest, you know, I'm surprised when I go into a place like yours and I'm like, oh, Nick can do it all. Like, your hoppy beers were great. You weren't as happy. We brewed one of our 10th anniversary beers with Nick over at Bartlett. And then, you know, during the brew day, since we all can't fit in the brew house, we sat at the bar and drank three of your beers. And your West Coast were fantastic. You had a West Coast Pale Ale on, you had a West Coast IPA, and those are great too. But you don't have, do you have a passion for brewing those, or do you just kind of?
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not doing like, I mean, pretty much the cool thing about that spot is that really I can do kind of whatever. If I didn't have an IPA, obviously people wouldn't be.
You'd have to have an IPA.
Yeah. But I love hoppy beer now, and I love brewing it. I'm always weirded. I don't understand brewers that, for all the things I just said about hops and other styles.
Yeah.
I don't get how you don't want to play with this super expressive ingredient that is hops, and like, yeah, I love drinking and making hoppy beer as well. The cool thing about brew pubs, I think, is you like not only can do everything, you kind of have to. Like, you're putting together a full beer program. If you're not like a package oriented brewery, you're just trying to make a place where anybody can sit down and have a meal and be able to order. You know, there's kind of something for everybody. You know?
How many do you like to keep on that are yours?
There's like 12.
Okay, that's a lot for a 7-barrel system. And
yeah, right.
All right. Well, let's talk about the next beer in our glass too. Postcards from St. Petersburg. What's this beer? Also delicious, by the way, but more rich. We're getting into the richer, I think, dark beers with this.
Yeah, this is a big monster, 12% imperial stout. Definitely like one that you definitely taste those hops in it, I think.
But you don't taste the alcohol.
Yeah, same thing as that Belgian beer. Knock out real low, knock out in the 50s and hold it there for a long time. And then like the warmest this really gets is like 64 towards the end.
Oh, wow.
Just let it ferment slow, pitch like an obnoxious amount of yeast.
What yeast?
This is, I think, USO5 is what I use for this one, because like, for one, everybody's using dry yeast now. I think people have found that it's not as bad as we were sort of taught that it was for a long time. But you're just looking for like a huge cell count. So I'll just throw in, I'll throw like 4 bricks of USO5 into like 3 barrels for this one.
And let it go.
Yeah. And I think it just keeps it clean. And I also think like adding those hops and that bitterness in there sort of tightens things up.
Is it dry hop too, or just?
This one's not dry hop, but it is whirlpooled. It's a ton of CTZ, Centennial, and Northern Brewer, which I love Northern Brewer and like in like anything dark. I think it just works great.
Okay. Classic.
Yeah, it adds like a sort of almost like minty aspect, like a chocolate mint thing. But yeah, big time CTZ in this one. the the end of boil samples for this, it's just like, oh, every time I've brewed it, it's like, this is so bitter. I don't know. Like
worry.
Do I dump it now? Like, you know what I mean? Like
right.
But it mellows out, and this is a really fresh batch. It's probably going to taste where I want it to, hopefully right around judging time, where it'll still be hoppy, but I think setting aside an imperial stout for a few months is always good. We have like the last batch is what's on right now at the pub.
And this is going to the Great American Beer Festival.
Yeah,
which you won last year.
Yeah, it got a bronze last year too. Yeah.
Okay. So I like that you say that. To me, beers like this, there's some others. In fact, there's a hoppy lager on here right now. That I always think, oh, I can't wait to taste that one in a week. Hoppy lagers, I think they age faster. Let me taste that one in a week. I bet it's going to be prime. I think you're right about beers like this. You need all those hops, but they have to mellow out. I feel that way about Sierra Porter when I've opened the freshest bottle I've ever had. Definitely feel that way about Sierra Bigfoot. Like that beer
right.
has to
like infamously, yeah.
Ton of hops in a barley wine, right?
Totally.
But yeah, I can see it. I like how you time this. You've started to kind of figure out, all right, I can pour it now, but it's going to do well in competition and for your own palate at the time of the event.
Yeah, and we'll see. I also think like hoppy. So I like enter this as like an American Imperial Stout. They have a British Imperial Stout category too.
Okay.
And,
can you enter it in both? You have to pick one.
Yeah, I think you do have to pick one for each beer.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I remember one time just drinking like a bunch of Imperial Stouts with friends, and just like everybody brought one. We checked them out, and there were a lot of beers I thought I liked better than Sierra Nevada and Narwhal. But when you taste how hoppy that is next to some of the other ones, you're kind of like, oh, this one like stands out, and it's like this is kind of nice. Sort of that same thing we were talking with a porter, where it adds a complexity to it. It's just like I don't know, like the nose is a little bit more inviting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like both approaches to making dark beers. I like the things that are just pure malt too, but
sure.
I think there are fewer hop forward versions of that out in the market, so I kind of like to lean into that a little bit.
Yeah. I'd like to have you and Wild Fields together on a show.
Oh man.
And the reason being, so they do so well in like the classic categories, right? So I want to say, oh, he's just great at these classic recipes and brews, but I bet he's more in line with you where he's like, well, but what's going to make it stand out? Like, what is that slight difference that makes it stand out? I mean, he just kills it in those categories. And I'd love to hear, to sit in on you guys talking about the subtle nuances. Like you said it early on in the show that you're into those kind of subtleties and why you might tweak a recipe. Yeah,
totally. It's funny you brought up Wild Fields. I was actually sitting. So I was in Paso. I think they were at Cascadero. But,
yeah.
But yeah, I was like down there during GABF last year.
Okay. When Ryan's winning everything.
Yeah. I mean, that guy's won all the time. I think they won last year with like their oatmeal stout. And but yeah, I had been there the day before, and it's just like, man, like, all these beers are so good and so clean and delicious. And they have an American brown ale and an English brown ale. They both won, I think, gold, and they're both like, they are distinct from each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's super rad. But yeah, the next day I was like, oh, I didn't try that oatmeal. So like next day, right when they opened, I came in, I was all stoked. I had just medaled for this one. But yeah, man, I think so. Like, working here, something that really stood out to me that Lewis once said, he was sort of like, yeah, what makes the beer special? Like that's like, thinking about that in beer, where it's like, what's like how can you quantify the intangible thing about this that you're really responding to? And I think that's always really stuck with me. Like that was kind of like the thing with the porter too. It's like, oh yeah, it's that bitterness that's hanging out, that's the reason I like these more than these other ones.
Right. That's a great piece of advice from old Lou.
Yeah. Oh man, he's full of them. But yeah, that's one that I think is like, okay, so like what about this? And I think it should be subtle a lot of times, especially for if you're making a more classic style. But like it, you want to be a little bit distinct a little bit. I think like there should be a reason there should be a reason somebody should drink that one instead of just I'll use Saison as an example, which there's a million Saisons, but it's like, why should they have this instead of DuPont if they can just get DuPont?
I agree. Yeah, why should anybody ever brew another one when DuPont is so great? Well, because you can make something special about it too. Mm-hmm. I think that is the great thing about classic styles. That's like only understood by a handful of brewers. I've had so many interviews where in the pre-interview it's, we don't care about styles. I don't care about styles. And I'm always like, all right, you can kind of say that. But the fact of the matter is they all come from somewhere. And for those of you who do care about styles, you can really make them exceptional. And that's fun for me. Like, I just love tasting subtleties with you guys. So Ryan, if you're listening, next time you're invited, Nick's going to be my co-host. Or vice versa. Next time I invite Nick, I'm inviting you, Ryan, to come be my co-host. Because I think you guys would have a great discussion about that. Like, yeah, what makes the beer stand out, Yeah,
totally. And I think style, like if you're too focused on just trying to, if you don't work that in, it can be a little bit of a trap. But there's, I like making weird stuff too. I love So there's room for both.
Sure.
But yeah, classic styles are fun, and it's cool just to be like, all right, this is like a framework for an. I think like I like looking at style guidelines or tasting beers and being like, this is the idea of a flavor profile that maybe I don't have on the board right now.
Yeah.
And then what would my spin on that be,
Like in that sense, I'd just be thankful for them. I'm so thankful that there are these styles that I now get to play off of, right?
It's like in like the cocktail world, it's all like riffs, right? Like it's you can't really, it's pretty damn difficult to invent something that's wholly new.
They kind of say the same about music, man.
Right.
It's pretty damn difficult. It's all just variation and riffs.
Right. And then it's like, okay, so what would be a fun thing to add in there? And I think it's all really, like, I don't know if anybody else necessarily picks up on it sometimes other than the person making it, if it is even intentional. I think sometimes it's just like house flavor or whatever, or, maybe that scale's not perfectly calibrated. So you use more or less hops or whatever it is that's in your brew house. But yeah,
maybe your glycol got stuck and you fermented pretty damn cold.
Totally.
Right. All right. Well, with that, we're going to take a quick break. And I think it's the perfect time when we come back to start talking more about being a brew pub brewer, because I know that you love it. And I think a big reason of that is that you get to experiment like this. So even though we're talking about classic styles, you get to experiment the heck out of those and others. So when we come back, we're going to talk about the joys of having a brew pub and a small system, and we're going to taste some more beer from Bartlett Hall. Hang in there. We're talking to Nick Mamir, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the session. We are hanging out with Nick Mamir from Bartlett Hall, and this segment is brought to you by the 21st Amendment. Check out their 2024 World Beer Cup gold medal winning Amendment Lager. If you're looking for a good craft lager, look no further than 21st Amendment. You can go to 21st-amendment.com, and you've probably served your fair share of Sully's beer over the years around here, Nick.
Oh yeah, that beer is wonderful. By the way, it's super bomb. That and El Sully are two of my favorite beers that I can find around these days. And every time I pour at a festival with them, I'm always like, hey, why didn't you bring El Sully? Why aren't you making that right now? I don't care that it's January or whatever. Yeah,
totally.
That beer is terrific, and so is the lager. Just the 21A lager is bomb.
Won gold at the World Beer Cup, which is pretty dope. Yeah, the El Sully to me, it's like whenever I go to like the Firestone Beer Festival, all the brewers just want Pivo Pils. Right, mm-hmm. There's all these incredible, unique beers there, and everyone's like, "Cool, that's awesome. I'll have a Pivo Pils now." El Sully's like that. Just give me an El Sully in between everything else that I want to sip on. Then I'll have a pint of El Sully or a can of El Sully.
Absolutely. Like that's one where anytime I see it on a shelf anywhere, honestly, I just buy a 6-pack of it. And I love having that beer around.
Absolutely. All right. So we've got a little time to get through a couple more beers. And we're going to talk a little bit about the just the pub model, a little more about that, about how it allows you to explore. But first things first, we've got a pretty unique and layered beer in our glass right now called Layer Bar. So we were talking about using different ingredients. We're talking about classic styles. This one I feel like is pretty far from a classic style, right?
Yeah, totally. It's basically a pastry stout or whatever you want to call it. This doesn't have any lactose or anything in it, and I would say the finishing gravity, I don't want to lead you too much, but it's like respectable for what that style is.
Okay.
But yeah, Monster Imperial Stout with coconut I toasted in-house. These like Baker's chocolate discs that I throw into the boil, which was like a thing I found. I started doing home brewing is actually like boiling chocolate, which I know sounds dumb, but I swear it has a huge impact on your finished beer. And then you can always add nibs later, which I always do as well. But I think it adds like a sort of a little bit of a depth of a chocolate flavor, and it's got Ceylon cinnamon a little bit, and it's got Madagascar and trying to remember what other vanilla Tahitian. Yeah, see, Justin knows.
Just because I took good notes.
And cacao nibs, all in it. 13.2%.
It's got a little espresso in it too.
Also, see, you're good. And yeah, this is actually the first time I added a little bit of coffee, and just to sort of add a little bit of a drying component to it was my idea. But yeah, Monster beer, I like that. I like throwing non-traditional. I think there's a lot of beers like this in the market, and it's not like it's not the most unique idea in the world, but I do really enjoy opening up the top of a fermenter and just slamming it full of coconut I toasted and stuff like that. To me, that's fun. Same thing as I was saying, like brewing with hops. I don't get how you don't want to do that. I really enjoy playing around with like those culinary beers, and I think also like a lot of times, especially like the actual dessert inspired ones, I think get poo-pooed by brewers, but I think depending on what your approach is to them, I think that it is still just like brewing classic styles. It can be intent based brewing where you're like, hey, if I'm going to say this is inspired by this thing, it needs to taste like that thing. So you have to, from the start, make considerations so that you're throwing a dart at the at the center of you're trying to hit a target. You're not, if you're doing it the right way, I think you're not doing things just to do things. You want it to be. You start with your recipe sheet, and it's like, hey, this is what this is supposed to taste like when it's done.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same approach I sort of think of when I make any style, classic style. It's just like, hey, if I'm going to say this is a Helles, it better taste like one, right?
Sure.
So yeah, I like making those weird culinary beers, and I like making high ABV monster things too.
Well, even though you've said, this isn't like completely original or anything, it is a difficult, in my opinion, because it's the last beer I would order off of a menu. I don't mean that yours is. I mean, if I read the description, it's the last beer I'd order off of a menu. But you've got to do it well, and you have done. So yeah, it's a pastry stout. You're right about that. But I liked when it's so well-rounded that most of the sweetness is just interpreted by the sugar left on my lips, right?
Right. It's 13.2%. Like
because
it's
the rest of it is
too.
Yeah, but the rest of it is like, well, it's kind of like the waveform that you were talking about earlier that I think you like. The beer is a journey with a sip. It's not linear at all. So there's there's some upfront sweetness, but then there's some bitterness. It probably comes from some of the chocolate, not just hops. I definitely pick up. I'm glad you added the coffee. I think that's a fantastic addition. It's super chocolatey for sure. And you know what? It's not super, which it could have been, is cinnamon.
Yeah,
because you've got cinnamon in there, right?
Yeah, a little dab will do you with cinnamon because it can get really like metallic tasting, is what I've noticed with a lot of like you have to. Just a touch, and
this just has like the spice of it.
There's just a little in there to, I think, enhance the chocolate a tiny bit. Like you're not even really supposed to know it's there on this one, just a little bit. Because I've pushed that too far myself, and I've tasted it in other people's beers that have cinnamon, where it can start tasting like a dirty penny real quick.
Wow. Okay.
To me. So, but I do like it in small quantities in some of these beers.
This is a stellar dessert beer. You said that you toasted the coconut. I was thinking as soon as you said it, like, oh, you just have your chefs at the place toast the coconut for you. How do you toast it?
We have like a big convection oven there, so it makes it easy. I hear like other brewers are like, yeah, I take it to my house, and it's like, oh my god, you guys are making like they're making 30 times as much as me or whatever, and they're doing it. So no, it's not that bad.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm weird, and I like having all those. I like to do everything myself. I like having like the tactile experience of like,
nice.
Yeah, I got to like. I pulled it when I thought it was perfect, or like I know when it wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
I just like things like that. Like for me, it's so fun to just like fill the kitchen with like this toasted coconut smell and be like, oh man, I get to throw that in a beer. So I get stoked on that stuff. Like
nice.
I like doing it all myself, I suppose.
And then so I guess why two different types of vanilla? So vanilla already can take over. But you had this idea. You must have just liked these two. I don't know.
Oh yeah, like vanilla is a crazy ingredient.
Yeah.
Where like different like vanilla growing regions can taste way different. There's stuff out there that it's like in too high percentages can taste like a garden hose to me. It can be kind of phenolic and to me the Tahitian is really very floral. It is like it's a flower, right? But and then the Madagascar is that like more traditional vanilla flavor. Mexican gets a little smoky, chocolatey. So yeah, I mean there's there's like Hawaiian vanilla, and they all are distinct, very distinct. So yeah, layering it in. I think I wanted, so this beer I didn't mention, but it was like inspired by like my mom likes to make these like 7-layer bar things for the holidays. So I was sort of like trying to riff on that. So I wanted to make sure there were like 7 different sort of culinary ingredients in there. But yeah.
This is one of the best pastry stouts I've ever had in my life. It's just, it's so good. Is it something you'll enter in competition? I know it doesn't have a style, but you could do it. You'd have to go experimental beer or something, right?
They actually added like a dessert.
Oh, okay.
They did add that style. I don't think this is sweet enough to medal. This did win.
Really?
This did win like in 2019. It won a gold in State Fair and LA International Beer Competition. But I've never sent this one to. Actually, I'm lying. I did send it one time.
Okay.
And it didn't.
Were the notes that it wasn't sweet enough? Because this may
that style didn't even. It was probably way too sweet. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
back then they didn't have that category. But I don't know. There's just other things I wanted to send this year, I guess.
Sure. Because what I like about it is that its overwhelming quality is not sweet.
Right.
It is very clearly a dessert beer and a sweet beer. So I'm not going to call it something it's not. But it's not. When I want to describe it to people, sweet's not the word. I just want to go, oh man, well. There's just, it's chocolate and there's a little nice bitterness to it. And I get some vanilla and I get some espresso. Like, all of it might equate to a sweet beer, but it's not the word I want to use.
Yeah. And it's like in that realm of beers like this, I think that I can't remember off the top of my head what the finishing gravity is, but it's like fairly respectably low. But I almost think that like, you and I both said this is probably not the beer I would order off a beer list.
Yeah.
But I would like, maybe if I was leaving, I'd be like, hey, can I get 4 ounces of that one? And the people that really like these, they like them really sweet. And I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think it's like who are you trying to please? Like almost this beer might be better if it were sweeter. And I think that's fine. I think sometimes we tell ourselves that we don't want a certain thing or whatever, because it's like, it's like, oh, I don't like sweet beers, but like
there's like
it can be nice.
They can be. All right, so there's a brewery that has like a club, and a lot of people here at the Hop Grenade like to bring their 2-year-old, 3-year-old, even this year's version of that club. I'm just trying not to call anybody out here, but there's a brewery who has a club that people are very proud of when you're a member of that club, and they're often beers like this. They're not all pastry stouts, but they have a lot of ingredients, trying to do a lot of things. And over the years, I've kind of come to dread whenever anybody hands me one. Because I have to, they're really proud of it, and they're part of this club. And I have to be like, oh, thanks. Oh, man, it's really good, you know. I want to be handed this beer, is my point. I just think that the kind of, I'm sorry if this sounds disparaging, but the kind of throwing the kitchen sink at the beer thing is just never my thing.
Right.
But this comes together so well that it's not throwing the kitchen sink. You've actually designed, well, maybe like you said, like your mom's 7-layer, like it had a plan. And I love the plan especially when the plan comes together. And I'm just kind of tired of these, it's supposed to be good just because it's from X brewery or just because it was like a member release. Like I feel, Nick, if you had a membership program, if anything didn't taste this good, you wouldn't release it to the program.
Yeah, right.
No matter how much it cost you to make it, you'd be like, nope, that didn't make it.
Yeah, that's the idea, right? Yeah, especially those beers are expensive, man. Like, it better be kick ass.
Yeah,
I don't know. I do think like
this comes together really well.
Thank you, and I like those culinary approaches. I kind of wish like there was more of that happening, like kind of the old Dogfish Head thing, where like. I'm always really amazed when I taste like a Jester King beer or like a Celador beer or something like that, like where they're using all these wacky herbs and spices I've never heard of.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, like how does this taste good? Like why do they understand those ingredients and how much of them to use? There's not like a book you can read.
No, but they
this
had
is
a
not
plan.
a good example of that because a lot of people do this thing, but with some of those, I think like a lot of brewers sort of roll their eyes at some of that style of brewing, and to me, it's like I'm starting to get more interested in that because it's. To me, that's nuts. It's like I don't know how they're doing it. Are they just blending it? Are they making little tinctures? And even then, a lot of that stuff doesn't scale. So I'm always really interested in
how. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we were going to try other beers, but I have to tell you, I love this beer so much that I don't want to end on it. I don't want to end on another beer.
All good.
I will try them with you after the show if you're down with that, and our staff
Sounds
here.
Good.
But this beer, I don't know. It reminds, so I think I don't remember all my shows, but I probably had a similar reaction like when Moxo was in here, and they're like the kings of the pastry stout, where I just finally was like, okay, I get it. I understand that beer. I understand why people love that flavor profile. I think that's a really well thought out and planned out beer, and I think you should consider entering it.
Yeah, it's too late now. Yeah.
No,
I think
sure.
It was the first time
next
I brewed
time,
it since 2019 or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, just because we can use the brewpub model as this. I always do like kind of a pre-show chat, and in your interview, you know, you were talking about how much you love working for a brewpub because you do get to experiment. And I want to talk about that, which I think we've talked about throughout the show too. But I also want to talk about how like the beer industry is changing. And so the brewpub model, the hyper local, the like, I know Nick and he works around the corner from me and makes the beer I drink, is kind of the new success model for craft beer. Not for all, but like if you're going to open a place, people are talking about how hyper local is how it works right now. So I don't know if you even think of terms like that, but whereas you might have not been in fashion as a brewpub in 2019, I think you're not only in fashion now, but like set up for success because of how the beer industry is working.
Yeah, and I think also like a lot you see these guys, these titans of the industry that grow up big breweries, and then when they leave and make their own brewery, they all are just like, I'm gonna go open a brew pub. You know what I mean? I really think just like work-life balance and everything, like it's. People get into brewing. I'm sure there's all kinds of brewers. I'm sure there's brewers out there that love sort of overseeing the Wonka factory and they like managing a ton of people, and like I think that's like those are important jobs, and I think that doing that successfully makes really great beer. But for me, I like that it's like I work at a slightly bigger, you know, it's a 7-barrel brew pub. It's like working at a bigger home brewery. And there's times where I go in, it's like, I don't even know what I'm going to brew today necessarily. It's like, well, I have some of this. I have some of that. I do less of that lately, but but I got into this because I want to make beer,
Yeah.
and I would love to keep it that way. So like I was saying with like the toasting the coconut, like I like standing over the mash and smelling it. I like, I like all the tactile experiences of making beer. To me are like, I like seeing the entire process and then just like waiting and being like, oh man, like by the end of this, I'm like so excited to taste this thing and then like see how it turned out. And then every part of what happened, I can kind of look back in my memory and be like, well, maybe that's what went wrong, or maybe that's what went right. I like overseeing the whole process. It's just me there brewing. It's just me there cleaning lines. I do literally all of it. I like a joke. It's like, yeah, I'm head brewer. It's like I say I'm the I'm the head and the ass. I do all the beer stuff there.
Right.
I love it. I don't, hopefully eventually we grow to the point where like I do need a little bit of help or whatever. But
sure.
But man, I love just like I can just make all the decisions myself, and then I'll bounce. I think I'm getting away from the original question, but I'll bounce ideas off of other people who make great beer that I really respect. Be like, hey, like you do this better than me. Like what's going on? Or like, hey, I'm thinking about trying this thing out. So that's where a lot of my feedback comes from. It's like people that I sort of feel like I understand their palates and what they're good at, and I pick their brains. But
sure.
I like not having to argue if I want to try something new.
Right. So then if some, I'm not going to say super cool brewery, some kind of cool brewery, but it's 10 times the size, comes and offers you double the money, you might go, I don't know, I like the lifestyle of the brew pub.
I do, yeah. Especially like, I don't know, I like making the beer. Like that's why I did this. I think all of us, or maybe it's just a lie I tell myself, but it's like there's more profitable endeavors out there, and like trying to maximize my money making. It's like this is a passion project, and I think eventually, like maybe you do get to the point where it's like, all right, well, like at least I still get to be in a brewery, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm still involved, and I'm maybe you become like a production manager for a giant, for like a macro brewery or something. And I think that would be cool, but it wouldn't scratch my itch. I don't
think you could do it.
I like trying a new weird Belgian yeast and like being like, oh man, that's like, this one is like super farty and sulfury at that temperature, and this one does this, and like, I think if anything has made it so that we've been able to win some comps, it's just that I'm brewing new things all the time, or just like brewing a lot of small batches and really paying a lot of attention to like what things that go wrong and what the outcomes are. Just lots of just repeating over and over and over again. And I don't know.
I love it, and I think it shows in the medals. I think it shows in the beers, and it definitely shows in you. I think you're right where you belong. Right. So, and if you're happy every day going in and out of there, then I think
that's like the biggest deal about it is I talk to other brewers, and a lot of them seem like they're super burned out.
Yeah.
And like, I have bad days all the time. Like, don't get me wrong.
Work is still work.
When I'm making beer, I am so stoked the entire time. Like genuinely, it's like that. If I won the lottery tomorrow, I'd just go do this again. You know what I mean? I'm doing what I want. And that's the thing I try to catch myself lately. Like if I want to complain, it's like, dude, shut up. You did this for free to relax. Like, you're gonna do this anyway. You're not gonna be happier. So just suck it up. And if you have to, you have to write an email every once in a while so that you get to do the thing you love. Like you're lucky,
Wise words, Nick. Definitely wise words. The grass is not always greener, and sometimes you got to be able to talk yourself out of that. So, yeah. All right. Well, I can't think of a better way to end the show. I think that's good advice for people listening, and I like to hear your philosophy on work and beer. And man, the beers were so good.
Hi, dude. Thanks for having me.
So good. I appreciate it. And hey, thanks again for brewing our only official named anniversary beer, our 10 by 10. Which was another great beer.
I sent that one.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I would love for that one to pull through. But
do you know how happy that'll make me?
Oh, me too.
I'll be backstage on my little video camera system. I might have to run out with you and I'll tell the person that just hit this button.
I won't be there.
Oh, you're not going this year. Okay. Then can I go get it for you?
Yeah, you go get it. Yeah, there you go. I like it.
Well, yeah, thank you again for doing that. It was just one of the coolest things for me to see your beer up on our menu for our 10-year anniversary.
I was stoked to do it. Thank you for letting me.
You got it. All right, folks. Hey, don't forget to go over to beersmith.com and check out the Beersmith brewing software. You can create your best beer ever with Beersmith. Free desktop trial, free web version trial. It's all there. It's the best brewing software, still actively managed by Brad Smith, the creator. So go check it out. We've been supporting them for years, and for good reason. It's literally the best brewing software out there. Go to beersmith.com and check it out. Also, I want to remind you about my friends over at the Beer Law Center. They still help me so much all the time, and they can help you too. Go to beerlawcenter.com. They can help you with virtually everything you need in the beer world. Buying and selling your business, contracts and agreements, federal and state licensing, alcohol compliance, intellectual property, and of course, what they do for me all the time, trademark and branding. They can do it for you too. So go check them out at beerlawcenter.com. All right, Nick, thank you again. I appreciate you. Everyone, you can go to bartletthall.com and learn more about the brewery, the restaurant, the hotel, all of it. And look for Bartlett Hall's beer here at the Hop Grenade. We get it every now and then. Or just go to Bartlett Hall and get it yourself. All right, everybody, take care of yourselves and your beer.
The Session is a production of the Brewing Network and brought to you by More Beer. Check them out at morebeer.com. Find more content and live video of this show on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Brewing Network. For sponsorship opportunities and information, please reach out to advertising@thebrewingnetwork.com. To reach our hosts, contact feedback@thebrewingnetwork.com.